Welcome in, folks, to another edition of Open Mic Night. I am your host, Noah Taluki. After a 2 or 3 month hiatus, I'm finally back with some NFL draft coverage. We're going to spend this episode back. I had spent a long time, but we're going to spend it all on NFL draft coverage from this weekend, Thursday through Saturday. It's one of my favorite times of the entire year. And joining me is a new face of the program. Never had him on before, but he is a student here at John Carroll, one of the quality control guys for our football team, and wants to get into scouting as well for a career. Tyler Habursky. Tyler, I know we've had Nate Leopold on before, and we've had who's a scout for the Texans now. We've had Max Loeb, who's working in the USFL now. We've had him on before. It's part of that John Carroll pipeline, man. Maybe you're the next guy.
It's a special place. It is, and it's awesome being on. And I remember listening to those podcasts even just a year ago with Nate Leopold. Who, funny story, as a football recruit for myself, coming here when I was in high school, one of the first people I met on campus was Nate, and a big reason why I'm here today. And then you see through your time at John Carroll why it's so special, meeting people like Nate and Max, and obviously yourself as well. It's a special place, and super excited to be on and talk some NFL draft. and also too, Tyler, you have created a NFL draft book as well, just like Nate did last year. Tell us a little bit about the process, that it took to make that book, and all the data that you gathered, and all the film that you watched probably too. Right. Yeah. So the NFL, working in football, has kind of been my dream ever since I was a little kid, and growing up watching football in a football family, it was always kind of my thing. So by 2018, actually, I started doing more stuff for scouting, watching the draft, watching players leading up to the draft. And really, ever since then, the process has kind of grown in how I handle things leading up to the draft. Just trying to improve, how I see guys, improve how we're writing about them, and then there's no better time to get the finished product out than right before the draft. Look at it, talk about it, and then in a year, look back on how things are going with these guys. So the process for me, really starts in November, looking at guys, and once they're done with their college careers, that's when I'll start watching film on them, go through their background information, everything to where they're from, what they were like as a high school recruit, did they transfer in, look at some, I note the statistics in my guide, and then from there it's, watching the film, evaluating what they do, how they do it, writing that up, and ultimately giving them a final grade, which then leads into creating my big board, which goes into my draft guide.
Now, I've always found it fascinating of how, some of these guys like yourself have access to some of that college film, because in the NFL now you have that NFL Game Pass where you can get all of the wide angles, end zone angles from all the NFL games. So it's easier to get NFL film for sure. But college, there's just so many more teams, and so do you get it off of YouTube, or is there a database that you subscribe to maybe to get some film? I'm curious about that.
There is no better time than right now to learn about football, especially what I've heard about in the past and what's been accessible out there. Resources are everywhere nowadays, and I feel very blessed that I'm learning in a time where these things are very available. So there are, to my knowledge, several databases out there, as well as YouTube, to get some of this film. Some of it's tough sometimes to come by, but you just do your best.
Do you have a favorite position group kind of to analyze?
Yeah, so kind of rewinding a little bit, I came to John Carroll, and played safety here for 3 years. Dealt with some injuries and knew I wanted to get into coaching, scouting, that kind of thing. So going into my senior year this year, kind of made the switch into, helping with the coaching staff in a quality control role like you kind of talked about. So the defensive side of the ball, in precisely the safety position, is really where, I feel like my strength is. But, while those are, your strengths, like safety for me, running back I played growing up, so naturally, there's going to be some, nuances there with having played those positions. But it's always a grind to learn more. There's always information to be had, and this is why I think that having these discussions and talking to people during the time of the draft is interesting, especially to learn more about how other people view the position.
And then by the time of the draft, when we reflect on how it goes, you can see how different teams, different front offices value different positions, value different skill sets.
You talk about your draft guide as well, and when I, as the listeners know, I interned at the Pro Football Hall of Fame last summer, and one of my projects I actually had to do was I had to go through and compile a whole list of every father and son duo that had ever played in the NFL and brother duo that had played, and there was like these. Because it hadn't been updated since 2020, so there was some databases that they had that I could find that information. And one of them was, and I cannot remember his name, but he does this huge draft guide every year, and he's from Mount Union. Our rivals, of course.
Dane Brugler.
I think Brugler, that's him, yes. So I got to use his draft guide because he had every draft prospect was so detailed in there. I mean, because they had a section where it was all about their personal lives and all that as well. And I pulled a lot of that stuff out from finding out, from these prospects over the last 3 years to compile the list about guys that from this book. So something, in case anyone doesn't know about some of these draft books, kind of similar to that, what Tyler's doing, and like I said, what Nate did, and Mel Kiper's been doing it for decades and all that. So very prevalent books out there, that's for sure. One more question for you, Tyler, before we head into some draft talk about kind of your personal journey as well. So when it's all said and done, what do you think would be your end goal in your career? Obviously working in the NFL, but what would that position be, I guess, as your dream job in the end?
Yeah, I mean, the whole opportunity that you have at John Carroll is really special to get that experience, with the right now coaching staff and seeing the schematic side of things, working with players. There's nothing like that. For me, scouting's always been, something I've always kept in my back pocket, always done some of that work on my own, and definitely very interested in, pursuing a career in the front office side of things, but I'm not shying away from coaching either. And I think both of them cross over hand in hand. And, where I'm at right now, it's more so just focusing on right now and seeing where everything goes from there and working my way up to wherever, I feel is best to call it the end goal. But, it's, to me, I see it right now as a journey of just, searching for information and then finding the place and people that you want to work with that works best for you. So, it's hard to say like a position right now, just to be, point blank, but, just want to be in a spot that suits me and, I enjoy every single day.
I like that. That's a really, really good answer there, Tyler. I like it. Just kind of go where life takes you, and have an open mind about that. That is awesome. Of course, as I've reminded many of our listeners before on podcasts, John Carroll has over 40 alums currently working or coaching and doing all sorts of things in the National Football League. And hopefully Tyler's one of those next guys, kind of like Nate and hopefully Max one day too, that we've had on the podcast before. That's for sure. All right, so I want to dive into some of this draft talk now, and how I kind of want to structure this is, we'll definitely talk about the Lions and what they're going to do at what Tyler thinks that they're going to do at pick 6 and 18. But I definitely want, and focusing a little bit more on the first round, we'll get into some later round talk a little bit later on in the program. But I want to talk about a couple of position groups that I want to highlight, and then kind of see where you think they would fall in the top 5 or so before we get to pick number 6. And I want to start with this quarterback situation right now. And there's just been so much shuffle this week between who's going to go number 1. I've heard reports now that even Will Levis could possibly go 1 to the Carolina Panthers, who of course acquired that via a trade with Chicago. But it seems like now, at least last week, it was more so maybe C.J. Stroud would go 1. Now, seemingly Bryce Young. What's your analysis there, Tyler? On I want to focus more on Bryce Young and C.J. Stroud, and why has there been this flipping now all of a sudden that now Bryce Young could go 1 to the Panthers?
Yeah, so it's kind of funny, growing up and up to this point, I've been a Panthers fan, so seeing them straight up to 1, it's definitely a headliner, and you see every year, the week leading up to the draft is insane with the rumors coming out, some of the things that the media is talking about, and some are true, and then some end up not being true. So you kind of take that with everything with a grain of salt leading up to the day of, but the Panthers, they made the move early on, which is something that we're starting to see become a trend over these last couple of years with teams making trades, well in advance of the draft, knowing who they could potentially take. So the Panthers trading up with Chicago, I believe that was early March they made that move. In 2021, the 49ers traded up to pick 3, and they ended up taking Trey Lance with that. They traded up a month in advance. Years prior, the Jets traded up in March, to go up and take Sam Darnold. So we're kind of seeing this trend, and it's impossible to speak on whether they knew who their guy was or not when they made that move. But I figure, they liked one or two of the guys, and we're just working through that process. And like you said, it's been between Stroud and Young, and what I think will happen is Bryce Young, and I think when you're looking at their roster and looking at their coaching staff, is they really shelled out to build this staff really quick. They have a lot of talented guys, talented coaches. Frank Reich is the head coach, but Ejiro Evero, he's their defensive coordinator. He was getting head coach interviews, and now he's the DC. So it's going to be hard to keep that staff around. So you got to get a quarterback. You got to get him in place there to kind of get your team where you need to be, make a playoff run. Now that Tom Brady's out of the division, the Falcons and Saints are question marks right now in their team building process. Going to be a different look with the Saints, and the Falcons have question marks as they're still building up too. So this division is open for the Panthers to make a run. I think Bryce Young is the most ready to step in week 1 to play out of all of these guys. I think mentally is really smooth for him. Things go fast. Accuracy, anticipation. The one thing everybody's going to talk about, though, is the size. And he's going to be, the smallest or second smallest quarterback ever. So, there's major concern. There's significant concerns there. But at this point, that's who I think we're taking.
He would. How about this? I'm looking at Mel Kiper's mock draft that he did a couple weeks ago. How about this? He would only be the third quarterback in NFL history under 6 feet tall to ever be drafted in the first round, joining Kyler Murray and Johnny Manziel. Wow. You talk about size, being a key factor for quarterbacks. Wow. It's just only 2 quarterbacks have ever been drafted in the first round that are under 6 feet tall.
And you know what? Like that's the other thing too, is you're putting the trust in your offensive coaches that the head coach, that you have a plan for this guy. It's going to be different than your traditional quarterback that you see in the NFL. So you have to cater the offense to his skill set, like most players. And I think it's going to be pretty similar to the situation you see with the Dolphins and Tua. You see it with Bryce. On time, guys that can create separation. He's going to allow his receivers to create yards after the catch with his placement, his accuracy, his timing, and then what he can handle mentally too is going to give him a high ceiling starting right out the gates.
Alabama, they just keep churning out those NFL players with Saban and company and all that as well. So that'll be really interesting to see, if it will be Bryce or if this is just a smokescreen and it will be C.J. Stroud. He is currently projected to go number 2 now, obviously, but some concern this week about this intelligence test that he took, and he ended up not doing well on it. And as an NFL quarterback, you got to be able to process information real quick. And you think this test is something to be concerned with about C.J. Stroud, or is it just something that the media is just kind of blowing out of proportion a little bit?
Yeah, so when you asked about things coming to the surface and the consensus kind of being all over the place, to me, in my understanding could be that these teams ideally are pretty firm in what they want to do, and they've known for a while. In an ideal world, you don't know how true that is, but some of this stuff might just be starting to get to the surface off players and the media and that whole world. So that might be why you're hearing more things from this other point of view. That as far as the intelligence test, I can't speak to that entirely. I've actually not heard about it until this year, and it's become more of a big deal, especially considering Stroud's results comparatively to the other quarterbacks' results. C.J. Stroud, looking over the past 2 years, his sophomore year, he struggled early on, and he improved from there. Granted, he's played with a lot of talented receivers and a very talented offense, a lot of clean pockets there. So where that comes in, I have no idea, without seeing him up on the board myself, seeing how he works through things. But he did play in a pretty clean offense with a lot of talent around him. So making that jump then, from one of the most talented teams in college football to, if he goes in the top 10, a rebuilding football team, if you want to call it that, his jump is going to be something to really watch for. And then again, how does he develop then through his career, as he's already been a grower really at the college level?
So, I want to also know too. A lot of people are comparing him to like a Jared Goff in a sense, a little bit, where it's like, you have to surround him with all kinds of talent and weapons. I mean, that's why Goff really thrived in LA, and he's had more of a renaissance of a career, if you will, in Detroit, which of course we'll talk about later. But could you see that comparison maybe with Stroud being like Goff?
I could. Yeah. I think similar athletes. I think at this point in his career, Goff is become the guy that's pretty sound mentally, sees things well, pretty efficient in his entire process, which caters again well to the offense and what Ben Johnson is doing there for you guys in Detroit. But yeah, I do see it. I have heard that. I think their differences right now are the experience, of course, but just how you handle that process, because you look at their skills and where they're at physically, again, very very similar, like you kind of saw, but how do you do that? The other things, the non-God-given abilities at the quarterback position, to me is everything, really.
I just want to talk about two more quarterbacks that are on this list. I mean, there's some mock drafts that have 4 quarterbacks being taken in a row. The other 2, Anthony Richardson and Will Levis. Right. I think we've seen Anthony Richardson rise on many draft boards throughout the last couple months after combine performances and whatnot. But I think a lot of teams are just so enamored with his physical gifts, his arm and how big he is and all that. 6'4". I mean, you compare him to 5'10" Bryce Young. And then you got Will Levis, same sort of deal. I feel like there was a little bit more hype with Will Levis maybe coming out of last year in terms of like the guys to look out for. He didn't have as good of a last year at Kentucky as I think some thought maybe, but another guy that's big, that has a lot of skill sets as well. Where do you see Richardson and Levis falling or going in this draft? Do you think that could it be like a Malik Willis situation where it's like everyone thinks he's going in the first round and he ends up falling to round 3 or something like that with these guys, you think?
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. We'll start with Richardson. He is very much an all or nothing kind of guy. Not to say that he can't find a middle ground, but all of the tools are there. I mean, this guy is a monster as a runner, as a natural passer. But like I talked about earlier, that the diagnosing, the mental processing, that side of the game needs to take a step, and it does. But the tools are absolutely there to get him there, and it's going to come down to the situation. It's going to come down to the supporting cast around him and how they can help him grow through his career. Because you know what you're going to get early on, and it's not going to be this instant success. You're going to have some growing pains, and that's very clear from his evaluation. So he's going to go in the top 10 with that physical skill set, I have to imagine, and to me, the Lions are a perfect spot for that. Now, I don't know if they actually do it, but for him, all right, look at some other guys. Patrick Mahomes, he was the 10th pick in the 2017 NFL draft, and he was not he was not talked up to be what he is now, but he took the year, sat behind Alex Smith, and the rest is history. Now, I'm not saying Anthony Richardson is the next Pat Mahomes, but again, both very talented, natural passers, and Richardson needs even more time than Mahomes did coming out of college. And I think you have the situation where you know Ben Johnson is back for another year. You don't know when he's going to be gone, and you know you can roll with Jared Goff this year, have Anthony Richardson, you know, kind of wait in the helm and then go from there. You know, to me, what's the perception for you guys then, as Detroit fans on Goff on the whole quarterback situation?
You know, I gotta say, Tyler, you know, I think there's a little bit of mixed feelings between fans. Now, me in particular, I am all for Goff. I think, you know, especially in this day and age, you need to have a quarterback that really fits your offense. And I think Ben Johnson has done a really good job as offensive coordinator of tailoring that offense around Goff. You know, so he's not trying to put too much on him. You know, he's been insulated with a really good running game, especially last year, and then with weapons like Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jameson, but now he's been suspended the first 6 games. Just signed Marvin Jones. He's back in Detroit now, so you get another veteran like receiver. But I think because if you don't have a quarterback in this league, you're not going to win. And it's like, what would be better than Goff right now? A rookie quarterback would not be better than Goff. So it's just like, it's one of those things where it's like, be careful what you wish for in a sense. If you don't like Goff, who else is going to come? Like what other choice do we have? You know, so I think there are still a couple of fans out there that think we should draft a quarterback, but I think overall the consensus is we're fine with Goff this year. We don't need a first round quarterback necessarily this year. And I think you bring up a good point too, Tyler, that I wanted to mention real quick was the fact that we don't know what the future holds for Ben Johnson. We don't know because obviously he got a lot of head coaching interviews this offseason, but he decided he wanted to come back in Detroit, you know, to spend one more year with these guys. And, you know, especially if the Lions have a really good year this year, he will probably get even more head coaching interviews. So it's like there's no guarantee about Ben Johnson's future, you know, past this season. So then it's like, okay, if you draft a quarterback, is he going to be able to fit the next guy's scheme? You know, that kind of thing as well, instead of it being, okay, well, say you draft Richardson or one of these guys at 6 or 18 or whatever, is he going to fit Ben Johnson's system, or is this a guy that can fit another guy's system moving forward? I just don't see it happening, and I understand your sense, Tyler, with that. I don't think the Lions are going to go for quarterback at 6. I really don't.
No, yeah, I'm hearing you, and I don't think they will, but to me, if they have conviction on a guy, you have to do it. If you have conviction about one of the guys and they're on the board, you have to take that chance. You know, you're on this track where it's like, you know, you fell short just the last year, but it was a promising year. You know, there are pieces in place. Dan Campbell is the man. You know, things are going really well there, and it's like you are not going to get this chance to draft a guy that you know, take your guy again. So we'll see if they do have that conviction. My gut tells me that they're probably not going to, but what I'm saying is if the guy's there, you got to take him. And then so we'll see what actually happens. And then talking about Levis, it's a little bit of a different story. You know, you talked about the difference between his junior season and his last season there at Kentucky. You know, he faced the coordinator change. What's really interesting to me about Will Levis and why I see him, you know, actually very similarly to Kenny Pickett, who was my QB1 last year. Will Levis is my QB1 this year. Both very tough, you know, both, you know, guys that teammates are going to rally around and become leaders of the franchise. Like these guys, Will Levis, Kenny Pickett, they're the true face of the franchise. And, you know, you're not going to light up the stat book, either of them. We know from seeing Kenny Pickett in his rookie year, it's not going to be, you know, top 5 in the NFL in passing yards, top 5 in touchdowns. It's not going to be that. But when the game's on the line, 3rd down, 4th down, and in the red zone, you can count on Kenny Pickett and Will Levis to get the job done. And that's why, to me, Levis is someone that I would draft in the top 5. I think his athleticism, his natural arm, you know, just like Richardson, both very big arms. But I think he gives you that ceiling as a leader and as a person of, you know, that the players are going to rally around so early on. And I think at that position, it's so necessary to have. And, you know, talking about the Lions with quarterback, you know, he fits that
I know he does.
Campbell, the toughness, Detroit, what they're building in their culture there. He fits it to a T. Now, if they don't like the player, then you can't do it. You can't fit a square peg into the round hole. But from their perspective on what they might do, man, that fit is absolutely there.
Tyler, man, I mean, at the end of last year's draft, I think a lot of fans wanted a quarterback in 2023 at the time. Like I said, now things have changed, but at the time, I think a lot of fans really wanted to get Will Levis. I think Levis was kind of their guy, and he, honestly, if I'm being honest, he was my guy too. Having said that, this is only if the Lions needed a quarterback necessarily.
Right.
I honestly, if the Lions were to draft a QB, I would take Levis over Richardson. I would, and I think you mentioned, you hit the nail on the head with a point you made, Tyler, about, and I think this is such a very underrated skill that I think is overlooked in a lot of mock drafts in particular, is leadership. And I think it's like a guy that will do anything it takes to win. And obviously, I know you have to have talent and all that. And I think Levis has the arm enough to play, obviously. And but you mentioned the coordinator changes and all that. So he's learned different offenses in the past. And sometimes if you don't have as much success one year, it's not due to just you. Sometimes it's the offensive scheme and whatnot, stuff that's out of your control. But I really do think that he is going to have a better career than Richardson does. And I know, because Richardson it's one of those things where it's like he has a huge ceiling because he has all these physical tools, but it's like there's still just, we don't know, like he didn't really do as much, he really was 1 year, I think he started in college, whereas Will Levis has a lot more experience in that, and kind of a guy that people would rally around. I don't know if Richardson is one of those guys or not, but if it were a quarterback at 6, or heck 18 if anyone falls, Levis would be that guy. Now, having said, I want to talk about some of these defensive players now, and I think a major consensus that the Lions are going to go defense. And so many names are out there. Will Anderson, who I really, really want, but we'll see. We'll see what happens there at 6. Jalen Carter's another name. Devin Witherspoon, cornerback from Illinois. Even though I've heard Nolan Smith from Georgia, even in there, Tyree Wilson from Texas Tech. I just feel like there's so many different ways that the Lions could go at 6 if they want, if they are going to take this defender that a lot of people think. I kind of want to start with Will Anderson. Do you think that he obviously a very talented rusher off the edge? Is he going to fall to 6 like some people think, or is he going to go earlier?
He shouldn't.
That's what I think too. But you never know. That's why I was asking.
You never know. You really don't. And you get to the draft, and what you think was going to happen, it's not happening. Right. But I think, again, when you talk about what they're building in Detroit, what Dan Campbell has instilled in the players, and you see it obviously, in the media, in the locker room, with how they carry themselves, but you see it on the football field as well. Like they're a tough football team, and the way that they act as a football team is seen in their play. And to me, Will Anderson, a captain as a sophomore at Alabama, he dominated as a sophomore, started as a freshman at Bama. This guy is everything you want in a franchise changing player. This is a staple of your franchise that adds to your culture, and he's a cornerstone. And I think his game's actually very similar to a TJ Watt. He's explosive, an explosive athlete. They actually played him inside a lot at Alabama. And you'd like to see, now at the next level, he would play on the edge opposite Aiden Hutchinson, which is incredible. Last year, my number one player on my big board was Aiden Hutchinson. This year, my number one player is Will Anderson. So you guys would have, you would add to that great depth at edge with Aiden Hutchinson. I think Josh Paschal is a solid rotational player who has inside to outside abilities as a rusher, and then James Houston, who kind of came on the scene last year out of nowhere, is unbelievable. So adding Anderson, if he's sitting there at 6, it's a no-brainer to me.
I think that might be one of those things where Brad Holmes just has to play the draft board a little bit to see, because he might have it before the draft. Okay, this guy's not going, but if he just because 2 years ago, Penei Sewell, it was a similar situation with Brad Holmes that he kind of fell, and I don't think a lot of people expected Sewell to fall that low. And then you could see it in the video reaction when they found out that they were going to get Sewell. You could just tell like. It was like Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes were like kids on a Christmas, their eyes light up and all that. So it's like, point is that some of these guys fall that you might not expect to fall, and that could be a little bit of draft luck there maybe for Lions fans this year with Will Anderson, who is definitely the guy that I want if he's there at number 6. Another guy, though, that would really plug the middle up well, I think, for the Lions, especially because it's, they had great defensive tackle play, I think, but I think he would just add so much more depth as well to that position, Jalen Carter. But, the one thing about him, though, and a lot of teams, and this stuff surfaces a lot, especially during draft time, the charges of reckless driving and racing, and he was involved in a crash that killed people in his car and all that. And I think that's really one of the things that's really holding him back right now is just some question marks about, that stuff about his character and whatnot. But even outside of that stuff, a guy that can really plug up the middle well, and, for Detroit, a team that really prides itself on stopping that run, do you think is he a guy that could possibly fall to 6 as well? Or is this a guy that gets taken before, you think?
I think there's a chance that he gets there, and his film is the best of any player in this class. It really is. On the film, this guy does things that no one else can. He is dominant. He is a monster on the interior. Can play any alignment on the interior as well. When it comes to the character, I can't speak to that. Of course, the reports and the facts out there. I can't speak right now to the person, but it does seem like, again, like you mentioned, that is what is causing, what a potential fall could look like for his, for where he goes. So, again, I like Aleem McNeil. Levon Wuzurike, they picked him in the second round just 2 years ago at this point now. To me, those are solid players, but they don't compare to Jalen Carter. So in Detroit, if they feel good about the person of Jalen Carter at 6, you have to do it. But then you just need to consider, how does that work into what you're building, because you're still a developing program. You're still developing that identity. It's almost there. You have some really great things in place, but how can you ensure it, and do you trust the character? And right now, from where I'm at right now, I can't speak to that at all.
Right. And and part of the reason why I don't think the Lions are going to draft him is because they've had a long history of not taking guys with any question marks in terms of character. And I just think that that's going to be a little too much for ownership and all those involved in the front office. With that. Now, however, some of these teams might know more than the public, obviously, and maybe it's not as big of a deal as people seem, but I just don't see it from that standpoint. But also, too, just from a player position perspective, I just think that the Lions need someone at 6, maybe who's maybe a little bit more production in the pass game as well. Maybe a guy that, like I said, can more of an edge guy or like a linebacker type kind of guy rather than just someone in the middle. But I think, if it's one of those things where Anderson's gone and those kind of things, and he's there, I think he's better than. I think he's a better choice than like Devin Witherspoon, who we'll talk about in a second, or some of these other guys that would be sitting there. So just another name, of course, to keep in mind for tomorrow's first round as well. And Witherspoon's actually the next guy I wanted to talk about. And there's been more and more speculation that the Lions could possibly take him at 6 as well. But I think a lot of Lions fans right now are having shades to 2020. With Jeff Okudah, who they shipped off this year already, and are just saying he was picked 3rd overall, and he did almost nothing in his time in Detroit, was hurt a lot, and got yelled at by Aubrey Pleasant, the defensive backs coach at the time, on the sidelines. That was very public. And I just want to know, though, obviously played with Kirby Joseph, who the Lions starting safety at Illinois when they were in college, but is he a guy that you really think should go that high, especially to the Lions? And they just signed a couple cornerbacks in the offseason. Is he a guy that could fit that rotation?
I do. And
oh, baby.
and Detroit fans, you can ease, you don't need to panic with this one. The difference between him and Okudah, this guy can play off coverage. He can transition smoothly. He is, flexible in the lower half to really transition with receivers downfield. So what he can do, playing press, playing off, and then his mentality and physicality in the run game really fit that entire corner mold that you look for. He's small. It's interesting with this draft class. There's a ton of small players, so something that I will want to watch for these guys as rookies and then into their careers is there are so many players that are outstandingly small, and it's like, how do these guys turn out? How do the injuries pan out for them? But to me, with like I said, Witherspoon's ability to play off and transition in the NFL is invaluable. Having that guy on the outside at corner that can do that week in and week out is as you know, very valuable. And I think looking at their depth chart right now, you mentioned they bring in Cameron Sutton, right? A good quality player, not a number one corner. Emmanuel Mosley, extremely talented player, 1 year, $6 million deal, has faced injuries throughout his career. It's very volatile there. You don't know what you're getting. I think Jerry Jacobs is a solid player as well. But, again, not a week-to-week starter in my eyes. So I think adding depth to that position and really securing, a number one corner, you're going to have to do it at some point. I know I can see where that's stressful. As we, just a couple weeks ago for Lions fans, you traded away Okudah. But rest assured, I think, Devin Witherspoon will give you more than Okudah has.
And so what do you think the key difference is between him and Okudah? I mean, they both played in the Big Ten, and as we know, is the Big Ten really? They're not that down in terms of receivers in the Big Ten. How much does he really have to cover? How much talent does he have to cover besides maybe like against Ohio State or something like that? But because that's what I'm always worried about when it comes to these, and just maybe it's just me and the bad shades of Okudah. But what is it that makes him stand out? I guess more than Okudah specifically.
Well, I think if you look at the players, they're night and day differences. They play the position completely different. Witherspoon is a lot smaller than Okudah, which lends to smoother hips, smoother ankles, smoother transitions. Okudah dealt with some tightness coming out in his ability to turn and run with receivers. And, you look at all the combine stats, the 40 time, the shuttle. These are all like great tools to see. But on film, how do they operate in space? Some of these bigger corners really struggle to flip their hips. And we'll see that as we kind of talk about some of these other guys. But that's, to me, what has Witherspoon stand out against the rest of this class and against so many other players in the league where you're seeing this change. You look at the Patriots and what they've done over the last 365 days. They've completely retooled their secondary. So it's really interesting. They're a small secondary with Jack Jones, Jonathan Jones, and Marcus Jones, the Jones triplets. They're 5'10", 5'11", under 180 pounds, and they can transition, play off, vision the quarterback, and create turnovers. And that skill set lends really well in playing off coverage and creating plays on the ball. So that, to me, that's what Witherspoon, that's the mold he fits right there.
I want to know a little bit more about another edge rusher, Tyree Wilson from Texas Tech. A couple mock drafts have him going a little bit later. After 6, but I'm curious to see, because if some of these other guys, go before 6, some especially defensive players, is he a guy that you think could be a real difference maker, for the Lions moving forward?
I do, and I think you have to have a plan when it comes to it, right? Yeah. Like how does Aaron Glenn see him? How are we going to develop this guy? Because he is not as
6'6"
developed as a Will Anderson, but the measurables are unlike anyone else in this class. Like, this guy is the ultimate freak. But you just need to, how are we going to get, a more of a physical style of play out of him? But the athletic traits are unbelievable for that position that requires those athletic traits, as you see with a guy like James Houston. Like, that guy is an insane athlete, and he had success early on because of it. You look at a lot of guys around the league that have panned out on the edge. They've been great athletes. So he has that ultimate athleticism. I think early on, as he's finding his role, he has inside to outside pass rush ability on passing downs, which gives you that value early on. But it's like, what's our plan for this guy, and how are we going to get him to grow into really what he should be?
Yeah, and I want to talk about a couple more players, more towards that 18th pick. Now, of course, we're just going to pretend like the Lions are going to take a player at 18. I don't want to get into too much about Lions trading up or down or whatnot. Just kind of keep it simple. Some of these guys that are projected to go around that range. And one of them that a lot of people have had in mind, we talked about corners earlier, if the Lions don't want to take Witherspoon or someone like that at 6, Joey Porter Jr., Joey Porter, the old Steelers' son, of course, corner from Penn State. What about him, makes him intriguing, I guess, you think, Tyler?
Where a lot of people are going to be intrigued on Porter is the length. The ability to disrupt receivers at the line with having that length and that profile. I mean, you see this guy. He has the ideal build of a corner from just his aesthetic, his height, weight. He ran well at the combine, and the NFL pedigree as well is gonna be alluring to some teams. And the Pittsburgh Steelers have their eye on this guy. They will. But again, it comes down to your scheme. What's your plan for him? Because he is, different from Witherspoon. He's going to be best, at the line of scrimmage, getting hands on guys early. That is how Joey Porter is going to win. And early on, you have Emmanuel Mosley and Cam Sutton already. So if they're starting on the outside for Porter, do you have a plan for him if he's not the starter? Can you use him in sub packages on third down to match up potentially with bigger bodies on the inside? In the NFL right now, we're seeing a whole influx of these big slot receivers, and then, as these tight ends are also, you play T.J. Hawkinson in the division as well. Like that's a former Detroit Lion. You need to match up with these guys. Is there a plan if the Lions take a Joey Porter Jr. and he's not starting on the outside from day one, how can they use him on the inside and potentially create those matchup advantages?
I want to talk about 2 defensive linemen real quick as well. Lucas Van Ness from Iowa and Brian Brise, I think is how you pronounce his name, from Clemson. These are guys that have popped up on draft boards before. It seems like Van Ness is starting to go down. He's starting to fall in the draft a little bit more. And Brise, I feel like he's a guy that's just kind of flying under the radar a little bit. Don't really know the reasons why he's been dropping a little bit, but are these guys that could potentially be great fits in Detroit as well?
I think your head's in the right spot. I think building through the trenches, and you see it with their offensive line right now. Things are going really well, and you look at a team like the Philadelphia Eagles. They almost always in the first 2 rounds are spending a pick on the offense and defensive lines, and to a lot of fans, it's not the flashiest thing in the world, but it's the right way to go about things. And I'm very aligned with that process. So I think for a Van Ness, talking about him, I'm a really big fan. He's my 2nd ranked edge in this class. I think his ability to set a strong edge, his explosiveness as an athlete, makes him an intriguing piece for the Lions. I think he even has more room to fill out his frame and get stronger and get more explosive. And again, if you add a priority guy in the 1st, 2nd round on the edge to play opposite Aiden Hutchinson, on a consistent, snap-to-snap basis, I think that makes you dangerous as a defensive line because, you have Josh Paschal and James Houston, guys that, were more rotational role guys. James Houston, more of a pass rusher guy in his rookie year. So how can we kind of build this rotation on the defensive line to maximize them, keep them fresh, and then really make them, put them in situations where they're at their best. And to me, Van Ness is reliable against the run from day one, and then you develop him as a pass rusher as his career goes on.
Talking with Tyler Habursky, John Carroll Quality Control coach here, and also a wanting to get into NFL scouting in his career. as well. I want to talk about one more player in the first round before we start talking about some guys that maybe to look out for in the later rounds, and then I want to get to the ultimate decision, Tyler. Who is the Lions going to take at 6 and 18 in the first round as it stands right now? But Mel Kiper's latest mock draft, he has Bijan Robinson going to the Lions at 18. And you just don't see running backs go in the first round a lot anymore, especially that high in the top 20 now. But Kiper's saying he's that good that the Lions should take him. And I understand they lost Jamal Williams. They maybe got a little bit of an upgrade in David Montgomery. DeAndre Swift's going to be a free agent after this year. He is definitely more of a rotational running back now, not really a 3-down guy. Oh, man, a running back in the first round that early for the Lions. I mean, I feel like you can get, especially this is such a deep running back class, I feel like there's other guys that they can maybe take later on, but is Bijan Robinson really that good?
He is that good. I wouldn't say he is the best fit for what you have in the backfield for what you're building right now. I am a huge DeAndre Swift fan. I loved him coming out. He was my highest rated running back in that class, even over guys like Jonathan Taylor. And his frame, Swift's, has lended him to some injuries. But as a pass catching back and his ability on the second and third level with his natural instincts as a runner is so impressive, and so I'm a big DeAndre Swift fan. I now recognize that he's not going to be your workhorse back with his frame, but having David Montgomery there, a recent free agent as of this past year, I think you ride with those two in the backfield and kick the can down the road with drafting a guy as a priority draft pick at this point.
It would be a luxury pick, that's for sure at 18, whatever the Lions want to do there. How about a couple of guys, maybe like one offensive guy and one defensive guy? You're thinking maybe could be flashes in the pan, if you will, later on in the draft that maybe the Lions could look out for.
Yeah, so you kind of looking, like I talked about earlier, with them up front on the offensive line. They've really cycled this thing through really well. Looking back a couple of years ago, taking Frank Ragnow in the first round, like you talked about, having Penei Sewell fall to them. I think at pick 8 it was in that draft class. Jonah Jackson, solid football player. Taylor Decker has been a key cog there for several years. And you have Hal Vaitai, who you recently signed, but that contract is coming up. So I think addressing the offensive line at some point in the draft is something that they should really look into based on where they're at and what they believe in. And to me, on the interior offensive line, potentially the guy that's next up in replacing Vaitai, if he doesn't come back, is Chandler Zavala, offensive guard from NC State. So Zavala, if you look at his testing, he is the ultimate tester. This guy is one of the most athletic guards that has ever tested in the combine from an athletic standpoint. There is room to grow when it comes to hand placement, footwork, and overall violence at the guard position. But I think what he gives you as an athlete is a moldable ball of clay that you can turn into something on the interior. And if you can find another guy on that offensive line that you can trust to be a staple with what you already have, you can build on this run game, build on being able to rely on your offensive line, which, as we know, is everything.
And Tyler, I mean, we're about wrapped up here, and I got to get into it with you. I mean, pick 6 and pick 18. Who do you think? And you know what? If you think that there's a mock trade or something like that, go ahead and say it. But what do you think ultimately the Lions are going to do at pick number 6?
Yeah, so I think with both of these picks, you have to explore the trade-out options. If they are there, you have to. I mean, especially, I do think, the quarterback position is something that's going to be addressed in the next couple of years. We don't know when that is. We don't know how it's going to be addressed, but it will be. So if you're not convicted on one of these guys, you should not take them. To me, if you can trade back and recoup that first round pick next year and kind of keep kicking that can down the road so you have the capital to go up and make the move for a quarterback whenever you think the time is right, I would agree with that process. Do I think it happens? It's really hard to project. You don't know who would want to come up, why they would want to come up. There's got to be a certain player on the board that a team sees that they want to make the jump for. With that being said, I think they stay sitting there at 6 and they take Devin Witherspoon.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
So Witherspoon it is.
So how would you feel about that?
I think a lot of fans would be up in arms, honestly. However, I think, Tyler, you really defended him well, I think, early on. And I think your point about him being a smaller guy can maybe flip his hips easier than Okudah. And if I'm being quite honest, I don't know if, and this is just my opinion, but I don't know if Okudah really had the right mindset coming in as well. Where it seems like Witherspoon is way, he's more coachable and he doesn't really bring that diva mentality. I think that maybe Okudah had, as well. So I might be a little bit more okay with it now after your interpretation there, but I think you're right. I mean, like, Sutton's not a number one. CJ Moore, he's suspended for a year. He was already cut because of the whole gambling issue and all that. And, obviously losing Okudah, but okay. I think we might be okay there now.
Yeah.
Based on Tyler, I trust his draft board and all that for sure. But finally, just 18. What do you think's going to happen? Trade up, trade down, stay put?
Again,
who would we pick?
You got to explore the trade-out option. Mm-hmm. But let's say we stay there, and this board could fall in so many different ways. There's no saying where thing's going to end up. But you know what? At 18, I'd like to see Michael Mayer. I know you just traded away T.J. Hawkinson. And I know it's a really weird situation with spending the first round pick, right after trading Hawkinson for, not even a first round pick. If you're getting really weird trading in the division, now you're playing against that guy two times a year. It is interesting to see, Dan Campbell, former tight end himself. How does he see that position? Does he see Mayer and see him how I see it? Like, this is a super reliable guy, great hands, going to be good after the catch, good in all phases of the game. Is he going to value that, or is he going to say, hey, I played tight end myself. We can put this need off, right, and we can address this down the line, and I can, get a later round pick to play at a high level. But seeing Mayer at 18 would be a great addition to their offense.
I was looking at the top prospects before we talked, Tyler, and I saw Mayer, and I was thinking to myself, I'm like, I actually was kind of thinking, like, is he a guy that you think that Tyler would actually think would, like, be good for the offense and whatnot? And I didn't want him. I didn't mention him in the players that we just talked about, but I did have him in the back of my head. And I will say, Tyler, if they pick a tight end, fans will be in more outrage than they would with Witherspoon. I just got to say, because that would be 3 first-round tight ends in the last 10 years. You have Eric Ebron in 2014, Hawkinson in 2019, and then Mayer. He is intriguing, though, I think, because the Lions do need a tight end. They do. And I think once they traded Hawkinson, Brock Wright and their 5th-round pick, James Mitchell from Virginia Tech, and Shane Zylstra, undrafted free agent from Minnesota State, I think they did a good job of holding down the fort. And I think Ben Johnson really tailored it into they were more of a safety valve option, these guys. And, they had a couple touchdowns here and there and a couple catches, but more so blocking tight ends. So I guess in a sense, if that were to happen, I think Ben Johnson might have to retailor his offense a little bit to try to get a tight end more involved. This is a very deep tight end class, I know, though. So it's one of those things where maybe if the Lions do want to get a tight end, maybe they wait till like that 2nd, 3rd round, 4th round, kind of guy. But man, to jump up there and take Mayer, I think that would be real interesting. And if this guy ends up being like a Hawkinson or Ebron, a little bit of a bust. That's not going to sit well with people, but I appreciate your analysis on that, though. That's that'll be interesting to see what happens there. I do want to ask you about one more guy before we take off. And it's a guy I forgot to ask you about earlier, but some folks think that since Jameson Williams is suspended for 6 games now, and maybe you draft a wide receiver, and it's another deep wide receiver class. I know a lot of Lions fans are a little bit enamored with Quentin Johnson from TCU, and it's because he torched the Michigan Wolverines in the Fiesta Bowl last year, and that's how they know about this guy. He's a perfect NFL fit. Is he a guy that maybe you kind of keep your eye on if you're a Lions fan sitting there at 18?
Picking at 18, like we kind of talked about, it's a very deciding factor on how you're going to build your team. And I don't think you overreact at all to the Jameson Williams suspension because, what's the process here? The process here is to build this roster up and, make a run to the Super Bowl. At the end of the day, like that is going to be the goal. And I think overreacting to a news piece like that, which is only going to last just over a month, I don't think you can change your draft plan, which changes your entire process. I think you guys know Amon-Ra, like that guy is so reliable in the slot. You know what you're getting with him, and Jameson is a great asset to have alongside him. As that deep threat, as the guy that can take the ball, the top off the defense. And then you have Marvin Jones and Josh Reynolds as well, 2 reliable receivers, and they'll be that third option in there. So to me right now, looking at, you invested a first in Jameson last year, okay, and you have Amon-Ra who, it's looking like you're going to pay him, and when the time comes, 2 guys in the offense. To me, it's tough putting more assets into that receiver position.
It'll be really interesting to see how this 2023 draft all unfolds. April 27th through 29th in Kansas City, Missouri, and then in 2024 it heads to Campus Martius, downtown Detroit as well. So we're officially 1 year away from Detroit hosting the draft as well. But Tyler, I really wanted to thank you so much for all your excellent draft analysis and seeing where things might fall for the Lions, if they go quarterback, if they go Will Anderson, if he falls down. Witherspoon, another interesting one at 6 to go to, if they're going to trade up or down. So I really appreciate it, and really, really good. Glad that you were able to join me here.
Yeah, I really appreciate you having me on. There's no time like the draft, talking some ball, talking some Lions, and I really appreciate all you do around here at John Carroll, and I really value our friendship. So thanks again for having me on.
And thanks again, Tyler. And join us next week as well. We're going to try to get Tyler on to talk a little bit more about some more analysis on what happened in the draft and what the Lions did, and maybe as there's always drama on draft night, and we'll talk about that all next week as well. But thanks again, folks, for tuning in, and make sure to tune in next week only on Open Mic Night.